Welcome to the Hunting Beast Report, a live video podcast with Dan Infalt and host Jeremy Gillespie.
Today's podcast is brought to you by Stealth Outdoors. The off-season's a great time to rehab your gear, so head on over to Stealth Outdoors at www.stealthoutdoors.com to pick up some climbing stick wraps, cam buckle covers, platform cable wraps, or stealth strip rolls for all of your miscellaneous silencing needs. Today's show is also made possible by Hunting Beast Gear, innovators in mobile hunting gear and the designers of the Beast Sticks and Beast Stand. Check out the latest products at www.huntingbeastgear.com. And now, on to the podcast. All right, we're live today. We're joined by Dan Infalt, as always, and very special guest, Mr. Billy Molls. Billy, how you doing today?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me, guys.
Yeah, appreciate you coming on.
Billy.
For people that don't know, Billy, we'll let you introduce yourself. We'll give you a real quick overview, though. Billy's an Alaskan guide of over 20 years, a sought-out public speaker, and in this episode, we're going to talk about how Billy got started as a guide in Alaska, some of his favorite and wildest stories, some of his recommendations for hunters looking to take their first Alaskan hunt. So got a lot more to talk about, but Billy, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thank you. Yep, grew up maybe 150 miles northwest of Dan, northwest Wisconsin on a farm. Loved hunting, trapping, the outdoors. Didn't really care for farming. So it would almost seem like trapping and hunting was a bit of an escape for me from farming, and also just almost like everyday life. My grandpa was a professional trapper. He was a farmer as well, but all in the winters, he would go to the Northwoods of Wisconsin and trap. So his lifestyle definitely inspired me. He took pictures and videos. And so, yeah, that always intrigued me. Started hunting, loved it. Thought about what I wanted to do with my life. Didn't want to farm. College didn't seem, to be my thing. Enjoyed sports, but, clearly wasn't nearly good enough to go to even probably like a college or anything like that. And I really didn't want to do college anyway. So once that kind of narrowed itself down, it was like either farm, get a job, but I loved hunting. And Alaska, my grandpa always said, Alaska is the pinnacle of outdoor adventure. So that was always kind of in the back of my mind. And one day I just read in an Outdoor Life magazine, a classified ad, just about 20 words, big game guides needed was the headline. I just figured, man, being a hunting guide, that'd be pretty cool. And I always had this dream of making it to Alaska. Eventually I went to a guide school in Montana. Didn't know anybody, didn't know anywhere to start. This was basically right when the internet was starting. So like sports shows, I was reading a book or a movie or video was really the only place you could get any information, or a magazine, I guess. But I knew people did it for a living, and went to that guide school, worked for an outfitter in Idaho that first fall. Then the following winter, just called, emailed every outfitter I could find in Alaska, and just told them flat out I didn't know anything, but I was a farm kid and I was willing to do whatever it took to learn. Guy hires me on in Alaska, serve as a packer for a couple of years. I'd basically stay there from like April through sometime in October, and then I would always come home and I'd go back to the farm and I'd just work. Stayed single until I was 26-ish, I guess. And got a guide's license and been doing it. I guess I've done it 25 years. For probably about 7 or 8 years in there, I would get done in Alaska, and then I'd go back to Idaho, and then I'd guide elk hunters there until basically Thanksgiving. So, but I'd always come back home to Wisconsin, and just had a video camera in my hand the whole time. And that was something that I always just did for home video, really largely to share with my grandpa. And eventually probably about 8 years in, I produced my first quote unquote hunting DVD, and started getting opportunities to do public speaking at like local civic organizations. Always kind of dreamed of maybe being a writer or a film producer. Those were all things in the back of my mind, as well as hunting guide. And just kind of strangely, I just kind of kept the ball rolling, so to speak, and all those things and different opportunities, things aligned, and they all kind of came together. And now what I do with, under the brand Modern Day Mountain Man you know, in addition to guiding, but modern day mountain man is more like the storytelling of the adventures that me and my clients experience in the wilderness of Alaska. And it just really, like, I don't know, dumb luck or divine intervention, or maybe some of all of those things, is ultimately like I'm a storyteller. And so whether it's public speaking or video production or writing, it is, you know, I always say, like, storytelling is the oldest art form there is. And when I look back at it, and Dan and I, you know, we were talking about this a little bit before the podcast started, is I can see that in Dan, you know, as a guy that just did it because he loved to do it. And then that was it, and never had any probably notion or real idea that one day that he'd do something with it, you know, in the public realm and to share with people. I kind of look at it as like playing poker, you know, like when you cash out, right? You don't want to cash out too soon. But when I look back at it, I'm so glad that I went to Alaska, and I never had any inkling that I was going to try to film and produce videos when I started, because I don't think they'd ever been any good, because I'd always been trying to tell a story as I was living it. And I always would have tried to do things like everybody else did it. And so the best thing for me is I just got to be there and be immersed. And I mean, I rarely picked up a camera, you know, when I first started, but what I realize now looking back is that gave me the opportunity, because I wasn't busy filming. It gave me time to just simply observe and just be engrossed and immersed by all the things that make Alaska, Alaska. And like I said, I can see that with Dan, like with the knowledge that he has. He's not start for all those years. He wasn't worried about like producing something. He just wanted to understand white-tailed deer, you know, and I see, you know, I'm sure Dan sees this a lot too, but, you know, within our culture, like we want to, and with social media, we can get really quick results, right? I'm kind of going off on a tangent here, but because we were kind of talking about this earlier, but with social media and everybody's filming stuff's really easy, right? And then you get kind of a quick reaction to it. I'm so grateful that I never really actually thought it would happen for basically the first 8-9 years that I was guiding in Alaska, that I would ever do anything with the video end of things. I hope that kind of made sense. But
no, a lot of sense. And you got to do it for the love of the game.
For somebody who didn't really feel like getting into videos, what you've created now is really incredible. As I say a lot, I really do not watch a lot of shows, but I love yours. I love the adventure of Alaska. And like you said, it's a story. You're watching it unfold in real life. And to see you going after those, my favorite is the Kodiak bears when you go after them with your clients. It just, that seems like a riot. And you know, most people get to go once in their lifetime ever. You know, you got to save forever to do something like that. And you get to do it several times every year.
Yeah. It's funny when you say that. I was working with this editor out of the UP of Michigan, and this was kind of like I personally believe when I would consider my films actually got to be like films and not just hunting videos, if I could be so bold to say that. And how it happened is, like, we were kind of collaborating one day on the phone, and he was doing a lot of like editing, and he's a really good editor. And it all kind of a big spark for me was my parents were over at my house, and I had my 3 girls and my wife, and we were all watching Dick Proennke's Alone in the Wilderness. You
great
guys
show.
have seen that?
Oh yeah, great show.
And I noticed, I mean, it's simple editing. I mean, it's like almost not even edited. Basically, it's just, you know, they cut some of the junk out. I don't know. There's a little bit of music and a little bit of narration, and everybody in the whole house, 3 different generations from like 3 to, you know, 65, they're all just sitting there like this. Nobody's saying anything, and we just sat there and watched the whole thing in silence, because it was just pure, it was honest, it was simple. There was no rock and roll music, you know, it was just Alaska being Alaska. And so finally I told my editor about that. I'm like, you know, let's just make it simple. I don't have a cameraman. I've got a little consumer camcorder here. Let's not try to be like everybody else. Let's not try to do cinematography because we don't have good enough film quality for that. I said, let's just focus on what we have that nobody else has. And I told him, every other hunting show, you get the host, right? And if he goes on a Dall sheep hunt in Alaska, he's sitting there telling the viewer what it's like to, hunting a Dall sheep. He should be asking the guide who, like Dan said, has been, hunting 2-3 times a year for 20 years. Like, they should be getting that guy's perspective. And that's when we realize that's what I have that nobody else does. And not from like a beat my chest standpoint, but it's like, that's the message. And that's what we should be sharing with people because nobody else can. There's other people that guide and have done more hunts than I have, but nobody's, producing a film to show the layperson or other people what it's really, really like. And then I think once we kind of stuck with that, and I told my editor, I'm like, I want people to not even know that it's edited. I think that should be our goal. We don't need the flashy stuff because that's easy to come by nowadays. Let's just tell a good story, show people what Alaska is like, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And I don't know, in a crazy way, one of the best things about doing that is I've gotten like the best clients. So if you show the good and the bad, when you show the hunts that we don't get anything, you show the mistakes and you show the bad weather. And it was like, then all of a sudden people just like would call and just, I want an adventure. And if somebody calls you and all they're really looking for is adventure, like that's a perfect client because that guy's going to go home happy, right? As long as you keep him safe and you got some animals and, you're going on about your hunt. So I don't know, just learned a lot of things through that process. And a lot of it I've learned from the guys that I've guided that you spend that intimate personal time with. That's been perhaps the second greatest part of the job. The greatest is just seeing creation and how things work. I love that. As Dan would say, the chess match, figuring out how it all works and each game's a little different. That's fun. And what Alaska, for anybody that like wants to do Alaska, the best part of Alaska is there are no other distractions because it's just so remote, so wild. As great as going and sitting in a deer stand is, for 2-3 hours in the afternoon, it's pretty easy to bring your cell phone along and you're not really like engrossed and enmeshed with nature, where in Alaska, you can't help but have that happen. And that's what I really love about it.
Well, Billy, you mentioned your grandfather, and he was the one that kind of put the idea in your mind of Alaska. So 2 questions. 1, did he do any Alaska travel or hunting? And then 2, who are your other mentors that kind of influenced you along this journey?
So my grandpa, he wrote to an outfitter in Alaska, and I don't know, too much money, too much time, all of the above. He never did go. He would go up into Ontario quite often, and he'd go moose hunting by himself. Like he'd bring farm trailers and stuff. He had a homemade snowmobile that he'd bring, like a stick steer, kind of like a skid steer kind of a thing, like a Model A.
Oh, wow.
Unit. Yeah. So he'd go up moose hunting, but he never went to Alaska. And as far as mentors, I've had like a few guides, when I was a packer, had some guides that I shadowed, none like that I'd spend a whole season with or anything like that, but a hunt or two. The first year that I was on Kodiak, I was with one guide for a month, 2 brown bear hunts. He wasn't like there to really teach me, per se, he taught, I taught by osmosis, just by learning, but, just like anything, you learn a lot real quick. Right. A few pilots, a few guides, Kurt Bedingfield was one, Dan Sailors was another. They're both pilots. And I would say I maybe learned more from them about just being a man, and life. And then my clients, you get these guys, most of them, they're in their 50s, 60s, 45 to 65, most of them. and then you spend 10 to 15 days with them. Like I kind of figured it was kind of almost like somewhat of a master class of people, because you'd see their differences, you'd hear their stories, and it was like I almost figure I kind of more or less gleaned a couple of things from every client, maybe some what to do, some things not to do. And the first hunt I was on in Kodiak Island, this guy said, it's not the $12,000 that I'm spending on this hunt, it's the $250,000 that I'm losing being away from my business for 2 weeks.
Oh, wow.
To me,
Yeah.
$250,000 as a 19-year-old kid, that was like what you worked your whole life for.
Yeah.
That guy was going to lose that in 2 weeks. So it just opened my eyes a lot. I didn't know. Yeah. My eyes were open many times over the different people that I've met. So yeah, a lot of my clients are my best friends. So I kind of had like a whole tribe of people that probably really, spoke into my life and helped me in various things.
Yeah. I mean, overwhelmingly hunters are good people. And if you're getting
watching a lot of grizzly bear and Kodiak hunt.
Go ahead, Dan. Sorry, we're a little delayed, Dan, so I can't hear you. So
watching a lot of Kodiak hunts over the years. I'm sorry. Watching a lot of Kodiak hunts over the years, because I'm interested in that type of hunt. I've noticed when you see these hunts unfold with different people, there's certain guides that I think, man, I sure wouldn't want to pay that kind of money and be with. I think your show probably does you some good, because people can watch that show and they get to know you.
Yeah. Yep, for sure. And I get it. And, you book a hunt, let's say an outfitter has got 10 guides, right? You kind of get run of the mill, and that's just kind of that's kind of the spice of life to some degree too. But yeah. And then as a guide for many years there, I would just get whoever stepped off the plane as well. So that's been pretty enjoyable. And also over the years too, get kind of establish somewhat of a repeat clientele anyway. And that's always kind of nice, because what you're getting, they know what they're getting. And so I guess it's just like deer. I always kind of figured hunting, it's nice going into the same spots that are familiar and that and then also it's fun to go into the new ones where it's still fresh and you got to figure things out. And I don't know, life has a funny way of kind of balancing itself out like that. But for sure, it's kind of crazy. I just had a guy that went bear hunting this spring, and we were talking about it, and he said that 5 days felt like a lifetime. And it's one of those things that's kind of hard to really fathom until you've been there, done it. Hunting 16 days, you're in a tent, you're with somebody, like literally 23 hours and 45 minutes a day in bad weather and enduring some type of adversity and hardship almost every single time. And so 15 days with somebody, you get to know them quite well, and the layers peel down really, really fast. Like we were just at a graduation for some friends, and you kind of talk with people and just kind of surface level chit chat. When you get to Alaskan hunt, it's amazing how that intimate setting, you just get to know somebody very, very well.
Yeah. And Billy, you had a great quote on a video. We're going to talk about the video in a little bit, but we'll get to the quote since it seems appropriate right now. And you said adversity is either a wedge or cement. And I feel like on these backpacking style or backcountry hunting trips, that's super true, because you find out really quick, especially when there's any adversity, what kind of person you're dealing with.
Yeah, for sure. You find out their weak spots, and I wouldn't say that I'm like some excellent leader or anything, but I mean, it's just like anything, you kind of figure out how to motivate people. I understand men fairly well in that regard, but then it also exposes your own weaknesses, right? And a good analogy is like side hilling. People will train to go up, they'll go up and down the mountain, or they'll climb stadiums or the biggest hill they have by their house. And then they come to Alaska and you do one side hill for about a half mile, and their feet are all torn up because they didn't train for that. And in our modern world, we can work around our weaknesses really, really easy, right? You don't know how to plumb. Well, you can hire a plumber, right? But in the Alaska wilderness, it causes you to get honest with yourself and the people that you're with. And I don't know. So I personally really enjoy that challenge, and I really enjoy getting to know people on that level. It's not always pretty, but I don't know. I tend to really, really believe that. And to me, having done that with a lot of people, like, it takes a lot to surprise me as far as, people's weakness, and for them to be vulnerable with, one another, because when you're there and you got, 7 miles to get back to camp, like, the truth comes out, right?
Right.
And I also kind of think that's
one way or
that's
another.
yes. And so that's really, number one, it's humbled me to a degree, but that's helped me as a storyteller, as a film producer, and largely as a public speaker, is in communicating with people to come with some level of humility rather than pride. Because if you come to people with humility, like, everybody's guards go down, particularly men, And I've learned that, like, this one old guy's name was Jim Schwender. He guided in Alaska for, I don't know, darn near 40 years. I got a few videos with him in it. And it was just like, everybody'd be telling stories around the base camp, except for Jim. Because he didn't have to, because he'd been there, done that. He was a PH in Africa for like 25 years. So it's usually the guy that's the quietest. That's the guy that's probably been there, done that the most. And Jim was one of those guys.
Well, Billy, we got a ton of DIY guys on the Hunting Beast. So I want to talk about, obviously you're a guide and we're talking about guides, but two things. What would you recommend as a first Alaskan hunt? So let's talk about maybe species and time of the year. And for a lot of experienced outdoorsmen, give me a case why they would get a guide and a case why they wouldn't get one.
Yep. So right now, everything, my theory is, just like in nature, things cycle, just like a housing market or an economy or whatever. So I think, like, hunting, things cycle. Right now, I tend to believe unguided hunts they're very popular because there's a lot of information out there. They're getting easier to be successful at, but they're pretty hard to find. And so the demand for them, I think, is higher. For the unguided hunts is higher in a lot of regards, most regards perhaps, than for guided hunts. Obviously, unguided hunts are still more inexpensive. You still get the ownership, and if you're into the planning and all that stuff, you get to do all that stuff. Still, absolutely nothing wrong with it at all. As on the average, I think the unguided moose average success is like 15%. The unguided, or the guided moose success is like 50 statewide. So yeah, I think, other than the obvious pros and cons of both, I would say the best animal to start with if you want to go on a guided hunt in today's market, if you will, would be a grizzly bear. Grizzly bear hunts were like $15,000 10, 15 years ago, and now they're like 20, maybe 25 on the absolute high end. Still quite a bit of money. But caribou hunts are now about 20 grand, 15 to 25 grand is about the going rate for a guided hunt. There are, and the supply overall is quite low on caribou. That used to be like the hunt to go experience Alaska. Do an unguided caribou hunt. Success was high. Trophies were pretty good generally, but that's getting a lot harder to come by. So moose, there's still some good opportunity for moose. You're looking at probably about 8 to 15 grand for unguided hunts. Guided moose hunts are about 20 to 35,000 for 10-day hunts. But I think the best value in Alaska hunting right now would probably be grizzly and caribou combination hunts. If you can find them, you're looking at about 20 to 30,000 bucks. So just in the cycle, sheep hunts have gone way up. There's some good, reasonable brown bear hunts, 20 to 25 grand. The high-end Kodiak, Alaska Peninsula hunts, there you're looking at 30 to $45,000 for the higher end, the bigger brown bear hunts. So yeah, I guess I don't know as that I don't know that I'd have a ton of light to shine as far as, as far as the pros and cons or the obvious things, other than the obvious things versus unguided and guided. But I always kind of look at like a black bear hunt would be really cool, in Southeast Alaska. But for me, for some reason, I feel like to really get the flavor and the essence of Alaska, a caribou is a good one. And a grizzly bear, I would say probably better if I were to pick. But if you're looking for a good budget type hunt, most bang for your buck, and there'd be some good hunts to be had out there, would be caribou and grizzly bear. That'd be the best value, I would say.
And for people that aren't as familiar with brown and grizzly bears, just real quick touch on the difference, like, the coastal and the interstate stuff.
Yeah, basically, well, it's the same animal. I think it's the 62nd parallel. Bears north of it, there's some deviation around that, but more or less the bears north of this boundary and in the interior of Alaska, they're grizzly bears. As they go south and get nearer to the coast, they're brown bears. So the brown bears will get 2 or 3 times bigger than a grizzly because it's more temperate and they have a better food source than the grizzly bear, namely salmon. And so the grizzly bears are, while they're smaller, tend to be a lot more aggressive because they're more opportunistic in what they feed on and eat. A brown bear will let a moose or a caribou walk right by it in the summertime. It's not even going to waste its time. It's just going to grab a fresh salmon.
Well, let's talk real quick, and maybe not Alaska, but we could talk. You said you guided in Idaho and went to guide school in Montana. Let's talk about guys. Maybe if they're not going to Alaska, they're going to a Western elk hunt first, but they might end up in grizzly country. And obviously, you've got a wealth of experience there. Give me some of your best tips for hunting in grizzly country.
Okay. Yeah. So, I don't know. I've never been on Kodiak there. We'd have to set our like the rules of hunting there. You'd have to have bear proof everything or hang it in a tree. Like in my experience, 90% of the time when I'm hunting, like all the food that I have is in my tent, or that way to kind of keep it away from the bears. Really not practical, to go cook a mile away from your tent. I mean, it really isn't. You want to, particularly when I'm hunting a bear, I want to keep all my scent localized. I don't want to spread my scent any farther than I have to. So I've always just camped with my food, everything right there. Probably the biggest thing that I would say that's helped me the most is when you get a bear in camp, throw everything you've got at it immediately. Kind of like a kid, if you slap them on the wrist when they're in the cookie jar, or you just tell them no and they take it anyways, and then you've got your what's the word?
Like
discipline has to, your discipline's got to be more and more severe. And they get conditioned that you're really not going to do anything to them. So one thing that I've found, you do get a bear in camp and I would just make sure the bear knows, doesn't run away, is I would just get their attention and stick my head out the window, make sure they're looking at me, shine a light. And if I see their eyes, and I'll carry a 375 H&H and then fire that thing in the air. And usually it's dark, and they'll see a big muzzle blast. And I would say, 8, maybe 9 out of 10 times, that's going to scare them away. Where if you yell at them or whatever, they tend to they get conditioned. And another thing I would say is pistol fire. I've found that about 50% of the time, it just agitates them more. When you're in that big open expanse of a mountain, or sometimes it'll echo off, like a pistol it just doesn't have the same effect, as a rifle. So my advice is just send one right over their head right away. Don't monkey around with it. That seems to work the best for me. And most of our bears, particularly the brown bears, they're kind of pussycats compared to some of the interior grizzly bears that see humans very rarely. And obviously those grizzly bears out west are getting conditioned that man's not going to hurt them. So I'm sure there's some aggressive bears out there.
Yeah, and I think obviously that's a big concern. All of my friends that have come to visit for hunts, that's always the first question: are we going to be hunting where there's grizzlies, and what do we do? And they're worried about it. I've gotten more used to it and comfortable with it over the years, but that's always the first question. So I figured I'd tap you for some advice there.
Yeah, I've never used any bear spray or anything like that. Everybody always asks me that, and I'm just like, nah, I ain't gonna use bear spray when I got a 375.
Right.
So, yeah.
Firepower, that's the answer then.
Yeah, I would say so. And most of the time it'll work. Yep. In my experience anyway.
Well, while we're talking about bears, you got to have a hairy encounter or two. So let's hear some of your good Alaska bear stories.
Yeah, we were talking about, and maybe this will, okay. Well, we'll stick to the script here. Yeah, I've got one.
Feel free to deviate. Go ahead.
Well, this was just a bear hunt, and I think you were asking me, and I made a note about it. I think you asked about like a humorous story or something earlier before we got live, but I was like, I've gotten that one quite a bit. Somebody to ask me a funny story, and I don't know, for some reason, and I feel like we've had a bunch of them, but none of them like just jump out to mind like a real elaborate funny story. Not that this one's that elaborate, but this guy, we were brown bear hunting, and he comes off the plane, and I didn't know him. He was a really, really intelligent guy, and I later learned he was a doctor and a lawyer. He was practicing both. I mean, that's pretty wild. And a cool dude. I really liked him. Wow. But when I first meet him, we're hauling our stuff up to my camp that I had set up, and he's like, "Here, hold on." We both had our arms full of gear, and we could see the tent just barely, but it wasn't very far away. You could see it. And he's like, "Hold on, I got to go to the bathroom." And, and I'm just thinking he's going to take a leak, And so I kind of turn around and just kind of figure, well, he doesn't want me to leave him alone his first day in camp. Rifle's probably not even loaded yet, And so I just kind of wait around and then facing the other way. And then all of a sudden I just hear, and I'm like, you got to be kidding me. This guy's taking a dump right alongside me, And so I kind of look out of the corner of my eye, and there he is squatting. I was just like, I'll meet you back at camp. So, but yeah, as far as hairy encounters, the
not the kind of hairy I was thinking about, Billy.
Yeah. But yeah, as far as like dicey encounters, the most dangerous bear encounter I've had, or the closest, I would say, I've had a couple where like if the bears wouldn't have stopped, like they had me, but praise the Lord, they stopped. One in particular, like he pinned his ears down, like everything gave me the impression that he was coming. And I actually, when I first saw him, I went to film him first. It wasn't a very big bear, old bear. So I wasn't, my first thought was, well, he'll probably run away. And as soon as I pull up my camera, I didn't even have time to turn it on. Like his ears came down and he just slunk like a cat, and he just started coming. And it was just a reflex that I yelled at, just, "Hey!" And as I was going for my pistol, but it was just happening so fast, he'd have had me if he wouldn't have stopped. And again, so that just that yelling is just give those bears something that they haven't, that's out of the norm for them. And so that worked. But yeah, the most dangerous one, we went into the brush, me and another guide named John Anderson, and had a young girl that was hunting, and her dad came in and was with us, kind of like marking last blood, staying about 10 yards behind us. And we went in there. I got a film on that on YouTube. It's called Shadow of Death. But that one came, and just the brush erupts. We're duck walking through these alders and willows, and it's so thick at times that you can't even see your hand in front of your face. And that bear was, I don't know, 15 yards at the absolute most to start, probably somewhere between 10 and 15 yards. And just the brush is erupting, and you can just hear, brrr, you can hear the bear growling, but you can't see it, right? And you can just hear the thing coming. And John's got a 458 lot, and he only had 2 rounds in his magazine because we'd actually jumped the bear once before, and we'd both shot once. And he just lays his rifle down. And he just points it. He's got a little clearing in the brush. I've kind of got a little more tangle, and I was kind of looking the other way. So I just step alongside him, and I'm just like, okay, where's the bear? And of course, like, this happens super, super fast, but your mind is just crystal clear. And John's just not saying a word. He's just, I guess I wasn't saying anything either, but his rifle is just hanging. And I just could tell that the bear is coming right at John. I'm just like, well, why ain't he shooting? And in my mind, I remembered he only had 2 rounds. So I'm thinking John's waiting for that thing to basically bite the muzzle,
Sure.
And I had 4 rounds in my 375, and I just figured, gosh, I got to be able to get some in this thing. And because I could see brush like being mowed down, and brush 5, 6, 7 feet behind it flying up in the air. Well, I knew the bear was there. And so I started shooting, and boom, John shoots, boom, boom, boom. And the bear just basically falls right before us. Was the first time that we could see it. And then I had 1 more round in and just kind of walked up to it and boom, put one more right in behind its head. And yeah, so that one was pretty exciting.
Oh, I bet. Sounds like it.
And it's crazy. I've never gotten buck fever on like a grizzly bear or brown bear.
So what's more scary? The a client you don't know with a loaded gun when a bear is charging, or the bear?
Yeah. And and I think you don't get buck fever because you don't have time to think. A bush pilot told me this. And I asked him, I'm like, what's going through your head when you're landing a plane on a side hill and you got a crosswind? Like, what are you thinking? And he's like, you ever watch Top Gun? I'm like, yeah. And he's like, remember when he said, if you think, you're dead? He's like, that's what he's talking about. It has to be so automatic that you're not thinking about it. And so, yeah, so it's kind of scary, but kind of not. Like in the moment, it's not scary. But yeah, I would definitely say, obviously, you're probably more likely to be killed by a grizzly bear when you're in the scenario. Or I guess to your point, are you talking, Dan, like when you're tracking a bear, like the other hunter shooting you then?
Yeah, with a client.
Yep. I would say yes. I mean, that's probably.
I guess you don't really know who you're with. I mean, if it's a client, you don't always know who you're with.
Absolutely. And you don't know how people are reacting. So yeah, totally. 100%. On the everyday part of hunting in Alaska, like if we're just out hunting, our magazines are full, but our chambers are always empty. Because then I'm definitely more, if you have your chambers loaded all the time, you would definitely, I think, be more likely to have an accident if your chambers were open than get charged by a bear, for sure. Yeah. So yeah, that's totally it. And you don't know how a person will react. I've heard so many stories. I've never had it happen to me, but I bet I've heard from 10 people that have had this happen. They have a hunter or a client and they go to bear hunt and they'll get up to the bear and the hunter will eject every round out of his gun and never fire a shot. I don't even really know exactly how that happens or why that would be, but I've heard it from so many people. And I don't know, that's one thing that I'm a little bit different than some. Like I've backed up, probably about a quarter of my clients, I would just guess. Number one, I tend to not get too many of the guys that are, I've got to kill it by myself. I would say most of my clients tell me, hey, you feel free to shoot. Because kind of as a general rule, like if you wound an animal, that's your animal. You're not going to go hunting for another one. You can stay and hunt the one that you wound, but if you wound an animal, you're not going to go kill another one, right? But so part of the reason, you just don't know how a hunter will react to that. You can't really practice that. 9 out of 10 do just fine. But, for some guys, it kind of psychs them out, because that's one of those hunts where everybody dreams about. And it's pretty easy to be intimidated by. And so, yeah, rifle safety, and you probably see it on my videos anymore. It's kind of just a habit, but particularly on bears and anything really is like, as soon as the shooting's done is like, safety, check your chamber, like before anything happens, because it's pretty easy to get caught up in the moment and get excited. And I've had a couple guys have rifle, what do you call them, accidental discharge. I've had 2 of them. Nothing happened, but they wake you up, and I've had a few guys that have had some closer calls. I don't know anybody that I can think of that's had like that I know personally that's been shot or anything, but a couple of guys have been close for sure.
Yeah, that was one of the things I noticed when I was watching your videos, Billy, is that you're a very calming influence after the shot or during the action. And it did stand out to me how the safety was like a #1 priority. And it was real obvious, the way you instruct the hunters. Obviously, that's a once in a lifetime experience for a lot of guys. And like you said, I'm sure the adrenaline's high and it's easy to lose track of the basics there, I think.
Yeah, I know when I hunted in New Zealand and I had a great guide, his name was Craig Smith. And, just him being there, because for me, I was just there taking it all in, what New Zealand was all about, right? And it didn't bother me at all when he kind of walked me through, step by step. And I just find that, I haven't hunted enough, killed enough animals yet. It sure doesn't bother me when somebody's just kind of a quiet, as long as you're not yelling, like shoot, shoot, shoot. I mean, I don't want that, but somebody's like, yeah, just pick a hair anytime, shoot him right in the shoulder. I don't think that ever hurts. I don't know, kind of seems to, I feel it works. I haven't had too many, I don't know that I've ever had a client complain about it. You get comments on YouTube, of course, but
sure.
Well, if I had a guy yelling in my ear, talking to me in my ear, I've been hunting 40 years. I don't need to be told what to do. And that's one thing where I have noticed, like women clients, they're usually always the best shooters because they'll always listen. Not that I'm like the greatest coach, but they will listen and they'll kind of match your tone. And if you'll walk them through it, they'll usually walk right through it with you,
Well, speaking of YouTube, real quick, you got a lot of great videos, and to be honest, before Dan set this podcast up, I wasn't familiar with you, so I've been watching a lot of your content and agree with what Dan was saying before the show. It's a great channel. I'm looking forward to watching more. So give your YouTube a plug real quick, and then I want to talk about your latest video, We Saw Jesus.
Okay, yep. YouTube's called Modern Day Mountain Man. Yeah, you'll find a bunch of stuff on there, a bunch of Alaska hunting videos. I've got a ministry that I call Trust the Guide. That's I've got everything that I have is on that channel. I only have the one channel, Modern Day Mountain Man. That'll be the same. You'd find me on Facebook and Instagram as well. So yeah, I started that really during COVID. I think I had a couple of videos that just didn't do anything, wasn't monetizing anything. I don't know what I was doing, but I wasn't doing anything. My editor just put them up, and but then COVID came along, and I had public speaking, a bunch of speaking gigs lined up for that winter, and they all kind of folded, about the same time, and didn't really know what else to do. And I'm just like, man, maybe I need to start putting some content on YouTube. And then I posted some stuff on Amazon at the same time, and I'm like, okay, this Amazon, that'll get some eyeballs and something will happen. But honestly, I think YouTube is, at least in the hunting realm, or what it's been for me, is about somewhere between 25 and 50 times what Amazon Prime has done. So just the exposure of it, I had no idea that so many people watched YouTube. So it's been kind of a godsend. It's been a great tool and platform.
Yeah. So if people, again, if they want to check
I'll just add that anybody who hasn't watched Billy's show should really check it out. I don't watch much YouTube hunting, as most people know, but his show is probably about my favorite show. I am glued to it all the time. So check it out.
I appreciate that, Dan.
Yeah, and let's give we don't want to talk about the whole episode because I want people to watch it, but that one specifically had some. First, you talked about the wolverine. So that sounds like that was a first in 17 years or something you said. So maybe talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, the only client that I've ever had shoot a wolverine in 25 years of guiding. So just an oddball deal. We were this herd of caribou, I don't know, there were probably 25 of them, were headed our way. And so we sneak up into position. We're 600 yards away, and then they bed down. The wind is right. Everything's perfect. And we're like, well, let's just wait here. You know, they'll move. We didn't have much cover. And we were in a perfect little knob. We had a perfect ambush. And then all of a sudden, these caribou just jump up and they'd run the other way. And I look at my hunters. I was kind of behind a rock, looking glassing the other way. And when I came over, they're running. And I'm like, one of you guys poke your head up or something? They're like, no, we just been sitting here. And I'm like, well, get ready. I said, there's got to be a wolf or a bear here. We had grizzly bear tags and wolf tags. We had all kinds of tags. There was a father and his two boys. And so then I see this golden eagle like swooping down. And I'm like, okay, what's that all about? And then I glass over there. And then when this eagle would swoop down, there's this wolverine on its back slashing its claws at this eagle. And so I'm thinking, well, there must be a kill or something up there. And I'm just like, hey, wait a minute. Wolverine season opens today. Not that it's like a big thing, but that's part of the reason why you don't kill many, as the season tends to be during the winter months, starts a little later than a lot of the other hunting seasons. And so it was the 1st of September, and you can downgrade in Alaska. You can use a tag of greater value for an animal of lesser value as long as the season's open. So we could use a caribou tag or a grizzly bear tag for a wolverine. So we sneak up, and the wolverine sees us coming because he's on one hill and it's wide open. We're way up in the Arctic. There's no brush. And I don't remember what it was, 300 yards, 270, I think. Yeah, about 300 yards, I believe. And Barry Barton, a guy that's in a lot of my films, he lays down with his 375. He practices shooting gophers in Pennsylvania, so he's a pretty good shot. And boom, cracks this wolverine. I don't know what it was, 25, 30 pounds. Probably an average, maybe a little bit bigger than average wolverine. So that was pretty cool. They're tough to hunt. They're always moving. Like what little bit that I know about them, they're always moving. They're the biggest of the weasel family, so they're a lot like a fisher. You know, they're just, you see them and they're loping around, right? And you'll see them on kills quite a bit, and they pack stuff off, you know, and they rat hole it somewhere, and then they come back for another one. So that was a pretty wild deal.
And then the other thing that I thought made that episode really entertaining or watchable, and some drama, some suspense, was talk about what happened with the first return airplane.
Yeah, so we spent 2 days clearing a runway with a Rubbermaid tote because we had so much snow. It was so cold and snowy. And it's kind of crazy. That film, I think, is like 2 hours and 45 minutes long, but a lot went into that. We got three caribou, a grizzly bear, and the wolverine. But the boys, Barry's two sons, are like in his 30s or in their 30s. And I mean, it was like bitter cold. It was like our feet were, I don't know, more or less frozen. I mean, all but literally frozen. It was getting down to single digits, maybe even below zero, you know, and we're intense without heat and just the snow and constant fog. You couldn't see anything. We were pretty well tagged out. And it was the end of the season, so we were all ready to get out of there. And so the morale was pretty low. And so we get some nice weather finally. And I remember that one night before, we spent 2 days clearing this snow, and I just prayed that the wind wouldn't blow, because all I could imagine is waking up in the morning and then have that runway drifted back in, because we're landing with Tundra tires and not skis. But the pilots come in early the next morning, and the boys are all chipper, you know, and they're ready to get out of there. And I told them, I said, hey, as soon as you lift off, you're going to miss this place. And they both looked at me like I was crazy. They're like, no way. This is crazy. Like, this ain't even fun. You know, it's so miserable. And then Isaac and Kurt Bedingfield, they're both circling to land. And Kurt, the father, who's about in his 60s, been flying for 40 some years. He's up higher. So he asks Isaac, hey, you want me to come in? And Isaac is an exceptional pilot. Like, he wins the short takeoff and landing competitions in Valdez all the time. I think that the aircraft company Moll, to some degree, I believe they sponsor him. because he flies with them all, but he's an exceptional pilot. But anyways, he's like, no, I think I got it, Dad. He comes in, and we had this runway all stomped out, and he touched down. You get low and slow, and everything's white. Everything's covered with snow, and there just hits this snow drift, and those big balloon tires just catch and cause too much drag on that plane, and boom, just flip it right over. So a Super Cub weighs like 12 to 1,300 pounds. So they're light, and just flips it right over, and kind of, I don't know how much you tell me if you want me to go in more depth in the film, but what happened after that airplane crashed, and if you watch it, like I just dropped my camera, I'm like, oh shoot, because I kind of like don't really believe that it actually happened. So I was just kind of like stood there for about a second, and I remember just turning off my video camera and just dropping and running out there, thinking like the plane would catch on fire, if I had to pull Isaac from the plane or whatever. But by the time I got out of there, he was out of the plane, and he had shut all the electronics off. And it's crazy because after that airplane crash, Isaac, when I was talking about humility, that's one of the things that I've learned. Isaac was a mentor of mine, and I saw him very little or had little interactions, is just watching him day to day, him and his dad, Kurt. But his first words out of his mouth, and I'm like just running up to him, and he's got a smile on his face. He's like, I'm so sorry, you guys. I promise we're going to get you out of here today.
Which is just a crazy thing to say after.
Dude, are you okay?
Yeah,
your airplane's upside down. Don't worry about us. Are you all right? He's like, yep. And then I'm thinking of my old man back on the farm, chewing me out that I did something wrong, And then the next word, because I was just thinking, I should have made the runway longer, wider, whatever. And he's like, you guys did everything right. He's like, this is my mistake, but I promise we're going to get you out of here today. And it just totally diffused the situation. And I called Kurt on the radio. I'm like, hey, Isaac's all right. And Kurt's like, okay, good. Glad to hear it. He's like, what's Isaac need? And Isaac says, I need 2 shovels or a shovel and 2 ropes. He's like, all right, be back in 2 hours. And so we went to work, and long story short, we get the airplane righted, and we got out of there that day. And it was about midnight. I was the last flight out, and I'm flying out, and I look at Kurt, his bald head. If you see my videos, you'll see Kurt. And I just think of him as a father, and like how proud. I told Kurt this. I said, I can't think of any accolade or any award that my child could win or attain that could possibly make me more proud as a father as what you should be of your son by the way he handled himself today. And I told him, I said, if that's what it means to be a Christian, I need that. And I was, I was a born again believer at that point, but I'd never seen any walking, talking example of Jesus Christ as I saw in Isaac Bedingfield, not only that day, but before it. So, I mean, that's what like really one of the most pivotal moments in my life as far as cementing my faith. And then we get back to base camp, and Barry's like, you ain't going to believe it. These boys are running around telling, there's a lot of other hunters and guides. It's the end of the season. He said, they're running around telling everybody they had the greatest time of their lives.
Right.
And I'm like, are they into the whiskey? And he's like, no, they haven't had a drink. And he's like, are you kidding me? And I think what it was is they just saw somebody in, basically in a very, very low state. On a professional level, that's about as low as you get, right? Flipping your airplane upside down. And but just how he handled it, and like that's what made that hunt what it was. Like, honestly, in a strange way, I believe, had the airplane not crashed, like those boys would have not had near as fond of memories of that hunt and a transformative experience. And they both even said it before they even left Alaska. They're like, man, we would have went right back out there the next day if we could have. Because that's where life's lived, is in pushing yourself, going beyond what you're capable of, because you've got to fail to grow. If you keep, that's why we get stuck in ruts. You work in a factory or you do the same thing over, you're not challenged. I think particularly as men, we want the challenge. And I think that's a big allure of like trophy hunting is, I think if we can get over our pride and not necessarily do it for the rack itself, but for the growth that comes inherently by doing it. Like that's the trophy, that's the chase. And that's like, I don't know, like a healthy way, or I think an all around healthy way to go about it. Yeah. I mean, it's cool, hey, what did it score? I don't think there's nothing wrong with that. But if you're driven by those inches, and I kind of think that's what I was talking about at the beginning, I'm glad I never tried to set out to go to Alaska, be an Alaskan hunting guide that was a film producer. When I look back at it now, I'm very, very grateful that I never went in it with that idea, because it would have never taken off, or nothing would have ever happened with it. It wouldn't have been anything. So I don't know, just just go on those hunts, and let that's one thing I've told like my editors is, well, what's the story we're trying to tell, and you got to start out with like a vision, right? But then ultimately you got to live it, and that's part of the reason why I think it's been a big benefit for me in my films is like I never had to try to turn it over because I had to produce a TV show that year. I could always had time to kind of sit on the hunt a year or two later and really figure out what was impactful about that hunt, because some of these adventures, just like life lessons, we go through them, and then sort of like the lesson or the gold or the real marrow of what that experience was, you might not really realize it till 10, 20 years later, and so anyways, I'm kind of going off on a tangent there a little bit, but it's in that adversity. That's what I love about Alaska. That's the blessing and the curse, is the adversity of it. That's what keeps people away. That's what I think most people they're honestly, they're intimidated by Alaska, and probably rightfully so. I don't know, maybe to a little bit of a degree I am. Like, I know, like, I mean nothing out there. And that's a humbling feeling. You get out there, you could be dead and nothing will change out there. Nobody cares. There's nobody to care. And that's humbling. And for some people, you kind of get out there, you experience that. That's what I'm probably addicted to, I guess, because I don't know, it's really, really easy to skate by and, get by and do fine in life without really challenging yourself. And if you go out there, eventually you're going to get challenged pretty much every time.
Well, speaking of adversity, let's talk about the Bedingfields. I think you planned on release that episode a little bit later, and you released it early. So why don't you touch on that and what people could do to help if they're interested?
Yep. So about a month ago, Isaac Bedingfield, the guy in that film who crashed his plane, and when I asked Isaac, I said, hey, if you don't want me to show this film, I won't, but I just said, I think there's a powerful story there. And he just said, if you feel led to share it, you go right ahead. And that was it. So he's a humble guy, but his wife's family, they had a homestead and they had just moved there about a year or so ago, maybe not even, and they live off grid. So insurance is, I don't know the particulars in that route, but I know they didn't have insurance because off-grid insurance is quite expensive. And their home burned flat to the ground. And so I've got a link to another website on my YouTube on that episode where you can, if you feel led to donate to the Bedingfield family to support them. I think they've got five kids, if I remember right. But they're good, really good people. They've lived in the bush of Alaska, done a lot of missionary work in the Alaskan bush to these fly-out villages where there's a lot of darkness there. But I don't know. I can't think of better people that I know of to sow into. So if people feel led, man, I'd be very grateful to support them, because I know they've, probably as far as mentors go, not that they were actively my mentors, but Kurt and Isaac were definitely two of the most influential people in my life, for sure.
Yeah, and Dan, after we wrap up here, I'll put a link to that site where people can donate if they're interested to the Bedingfields. And then if you got time, Billy, we usually like to take some questions from the audience. So we've got quite a few here for you if you've got a few extra minutes.
Yeah, sure.
Okay. And then but last two things real quick before we get into the questions. You mentioned several times that you do public speaking events. Do you have any coming up? And then last thing, after the public speaking, you mentioned your YouTube channel, but give your website a plug too if people want to check that out.
Yep, the website is billymollsadventures.com, or if you just Google search Modern Day Mountain Man, my website will pop up, but just my full name, adventures.com. And as far as public speaking, I'm going to be at the Eastern Oregon Livestock Show in Union, Oregon, and I believe that's June 9th. There's a cowboy church. They've got a rodeo and like a state or some type of fair, and they got a big rodeo there. So I'll be speaking on Sunday, June 9th there. And the next one after that is June 15th in Hoax Bluff, Alabama, and Cross Creek Community Church. So you can find these on my social media, Facebook and Instagram. So that's in Hoax Bluff, Alabama, June 15th.
Awesome. No, that's great. And want to thank you for your time here before we get into the questions. First question is from Gooch Parm Actual. Is Billy's book available on Amazon? So I know you have some DVDs too. So if people are interested in checking out your content other than on YouTube, what's the best place to find those?
Yep, you can get them on my website. The book and most of the DVDs are available on Amazon, but everything's available on my website. I've got probably about a third of our content on YouTube, but all of it's on my website by DVD, and then most of it's available on the website by digital download as well. But yeah, book is on Amazon and on my website.
Awesome. George Hamrick asked, anything in particular Billy recommends for staying in shape for Western states that would differ from preparing for a hunt in Alaska? Let's just give overall fitness advice too for these type of hunts. A little different than sitting in the tree stand.
Yeah, I wouldn't say there's really anything different for Western Alaska or Western US than Alaska. I would say probably the easiest thing to prepare is walking on a road and walk on a side hill. Walk in the ditch of the road rather than walking on the road is just walk on the side hill and obviously go on both sides. I think that's one of the easiest things, the most overlooked things, and one of the easiest things that you can do. You know, obviously if you wear a pack or whatever, that's good, but get your ankles, your feet, your boots, everything conditioned for side hill, particularly for, flatlanders that don't see that very much. And then it also trains you in balance. If I were to give any piece of advice, that's it. I get marathon runners, they're next to worthless, and weightlifters are next to worthless. Weightlifters don't have any balance, and the marathon runners, they're used to the same stride. Most of them, don't get me wrong, they're training for it, but if you don't train for that with the pack, because the marathon runner is used to that engineered surface, everything's the same. And so that'd be the biggest thing. Obviously, hiking with a pack is great, but just get on uneven terrain and do balance and core, hips type exercises.
I couldn't agree more. That's excellent advice. And it's one of the things when I moved west, I mentioned to you offline that I grew up in Michigan, but I live in Montana now. The amount of side hilling you do in Western states, you can't overestimate it. It's all the time. It's different muscles. It's muscles you rarely use in flat land. And they fatigue real quick if you're not used to it, and it's a good way to get injured. So that's it's such simple but really great advice. Appreciate that. Let's see, Dan, we got 2 super chats, $250 each. Really appreciate those. Those are huge donations from Elizabeth Williams. One, she wants directed towards the Bedingfield family. So Dan, I don't know how you'll arrange that with Billy, but I'm going to send one of those. And then the other one, she just made a comment. There's a big difference in guides who just get folks to pay and they run everyone through stands, drop them off and pick them up afterwards. And then there are guys who go out and stick with you, share what to look for, and you walk away with knowledge as well as a hunt. So, and that got a lot of thumbs up. So I think alluding to, there's some, I don't know what you want to call them, mill outfitters, I think, that give guides and outfitters a bad name where they're just after the money. And then there's people that are, I like the way you referred to it, Billy, like an adventure guide, right? You're out there for the whole experience. You're making lifelong memories and friendships and stuff. So good deal there. And thanks again, Elizabeth.
Yeah, thank you, Elizabeth. That was very kind.
This would be maybe a question for both of you. Mark Burrell wants to know, when is Dan going on a brown bear hunt? Maybe Billy could help him out with that.
It's a little out of
I'd be
my
happy
budget
to help
right
you
now,
out.
but I'd love to someday.
Yeah, I think that's like the pinnacle. A brown bear hunt. For me, it's just hands down everything. It's kind of similar to whitetail hunting. There's maybe a little more like physical component to it to a degree, but it really tests your skill set as a hunter. As I've always said, you got to be patient. You've got to judge the bear. There's some patterning involved a lot of times. But then you got to be ready to go when it's time. And then obviously stalking a bear is usually quite exciting. So I don't know. It's just, you have to be all around, you can get lucky and one walks by the beach or whatever, but to consistently take big bears, it really tests your skill set. That's it for me. That's the pinnacle, I believe.
Fred Sherber says, my favorite 2 shows on YouTube. Thanks, Fred. And then Gooch Parm Actual says, tell Billy to talk about the first experience he had at Kodiak Island when he shot that giant.
Okay. Yep. So when I was a packer, yeah, I've got a chapter about this in my book. It was, we packed, I think I wrote in my book, it was 9 miles to the spike camp that we hiked in with hip boots and backpacks. We had 10 days worth of food, but the outfitter kind of assured me, he's like, no, it's 11 miles to that camp. So we hike in, we waited 5 days before we hiked in there. The hunter was kind of, he wasn't being, a pain or anything, but he's getting a little bit kind of impatient. It's a 15-day hunt. And we sat in base camp for 5 days. We hunted, but we didn't see much. But the guide's like, no, the wind will be at our back. We got to wait. He's like, okay. And so we get up there. The first day we're up there hunting, we hike in, set up our camp, wake up the next morning, we get there, and the guide sees this big bear way up at the head of this draw. It's like huge, steep mountains. Kodiak is very, very steep, very rugged, very brushy in a lot of areas. This was all snow, and there's a boar and a sow there, and the guide's like, yeah, that's a big bear. We should go get it. So I didn't have snowshoes. They did. I had hip boots. We all had hip boots on. And so we're going through the snow, and I'm collapsing every single step to my crotch. Like, I don't know how deep it was because I couldn't feel the bottom. And so I'd step in the snow. Well, there's alders in the snow, under the snow. So you're tripping in that. And so we get there, and this bear is laying right on the edge of this crevasse. The sow gets up and walks away, but he's just staying there sleeping. And the guide had hunted there before, and he said, if that bear falls in there, there's no way in there to that gorge. Like, we won't be able to get it out. So we'll just wait. Hopefully he'll wake up, go up into this avalanche slide of big snow boulders, and then we'll shoot it. So we waited there, as the best I can recall, it was about 5 hours, long time. Well, my jeans I just was wearing Carhartt jeans in my hip boots. And that was actually what was on the gear list. And so the sun goes as well down below the mountain. And so now I don't know what it was, probably 20 degrees, and I'm frozen. So finally the guide's like, hey, we got to do something. So he yells at the bear. That doesn't do it. He shoots at the bear. Finally it gets up, ambles away, goes up into this snowy boulder, avalanche slide. And that's when the client was actually filming the hunt himself. And so while he shot the bear, he asked me to film it. So I'm shaking, I'm holding it as still as I can, but he shoots the bear a few times, and we got this giant bear. Well, we have to go back to camp because we can't get around to it, and it's getting dark. So we go 2 miles back to camp. We'll come back, get it the next day. we get back to camp. The guide's like, hey, what do you want for supper? We had these little freeze-dried meals, and he was boiling them and getting stuff ready. And I kind of had some chores, so I did my chores. And he's like, what would you like? And I said, I don't want anything. And he's like, well, you got to eat. And I'm like, no, I'm too cold to eat. It's like, I'm going to bed. And I just stripped down to nothing and went down into my sleeping bag, and I zipped that thing over my head, and I just prayed that I would wake up in the morning because I was so cold. Like I knew, I mean, I don't know, I could function and I guess I could talk, but I was so cold. And then I don't know what time it was, but it was pitch black. I woke up and I'm just drenched in sweat and I'm so hot and I'm caught in this tarp, you know, and I'm freaking out. I didn't know where I was. And I'm like, unzipped it. And I looked out, I'm like, I'm alive.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I'm on Kodiak Island. I'm like, oh man, that was awesome. And then I wake up in the morning and we went back, got the bear. And then I'm thinking, oh, I've arrived, you know, that was good. We shoot this bear. It was huge. It squared 10.7 and a half. And it was like number 24 all time. It was a huge bear. Probably the biggest bear, even body wise, that I've ever seen since. And the hide was enormous. We pack it out, and we had beer back at base camp. And so the guide wanted to get back to base camp because now we've got like 8 days before our next hunt. And he knew there was like 10 cases of beer back at base camp, which is just a wall tent, but we'd have to go out to it. So anyways, long story short, we throw this bear hide on, and it had to weigh 150 pounds, just the hide. I mean, it wasn't fleshed. The knuckles were out of it. It wasn't fleshed by any means. And I had my rifle, you know, in the pack and some gear, and I got it probably half, 2/3 of the way, I would guess. And I just was falling behind. I couldn't do it. We're crossing a creek, climbing up over steep cut banks through the brush. And the guide, his name was Craig. He was tougher than nails. He just dropped his pack. He said, here, give me my pack. And I'm like, no, I can do it. He's like, no, just give me my pack, or give me your pack. So we switch packs. So mine's probably neighborhood of 170 pounds. His is probably like 120, 130. And it felt light as a feather for like, 200 yards, but then it was just as heavy as the other one. We get out to the salt water. The tide is going out. We've got a rubber raft that we have to drive 5, 6, 7 miles to our base camp. Well, we don't want to spend the night. So we're like Navy SEALs, we tip the raft back over. We throw the gas, the motor, all of our gear in this raft, and we're running through the sand trying to catch the water. And we throw it in the water, and then we're pushing it out because the tide's going out so fast. And then the guides, finally we get enough water. He jumps in, throws the motor on, and pulls it to life. And keep going. We're pushing. Finally, we get enough water, and then we jump on, and we're off, and we get out into the ocean, and we're cruising along, and the sun's going down, and I'm looking out at this place. I mean, Kodiak's just so big, so rugged, and I'm just thinking, man, I made it. But I'm like, I can't do it. I couldn't pack that huge hide, and I'm like, the guide's gonna tell the outfitter, and then I guess I'm not cut out for this. And we're going along, and I wouldn't say I was feeling sorry for myself, but I was honestly, like, in my mind, resigned to the fact that, like, I can't do it. And I was kind of okay with it. I was a little bit disappointed. I thought about my family, thought about my grandpa, and I'm just like, well, I mean, I might as well enjoy it while I'm here. I'll give it everything I got, but I guess I ain't cut out for it. And then the guide, he punches me in the leg. He must have sensed it. He just kind of punched me in the leg, and he didn't say much to me the whole time. Definitely no words of encouragement, but he just said, you made it farther with that pack than I thought you would. And I just kind of was dumbfounded. And he's like, look at marathon runners. He said, all the good ones are in their 30s. He said, you'll do fine. You just don't have the endurance yet. And I was like, man, that guy spoke life into me that day, because I don't know if I'd have had the balls to even try to come back again the next year. So that was a pivotal moment in my life. Just him not being afraid to just give me an attaboy when I needed one.
Oh, that's a great story. And I want to thank you. I'm going to turn it over to Dan in a second, but Billy, really enjoying your content. I'm going to watch more of it. Like I said, I was unfamiliar with you. I don't know how. Sometimes I feel like YouTube sends you everything but what you want to see on YouTube. So really enjoy. I classify myself as an adventure hunter. That's why I moved to Montana. I do a lot of DIY stuff because that's what I enjoy. And, a lot of stuff you said hits home with me about learning about yourself and learning about people. So appreciate you coming on, the time and everything. So I'll turn it over to Dan.
Really appreciate you being on, Billy. It was really fun. I loved hearing from you. You know, I watch all your shows and appreciate it a lot. So I will take the money that Elizabeth donated, and I'll donate it to the Bedingfields on your link.
Cool. Well, I really appreciate it. And yeah, hats off to you guys. Appreciate what you guys are doing. And yeah, I just love the transparency, kind of the no nonsense approach that you have, you know, just a real guy out there doing it. And such a testament to consistency and, you know, long-standing experience. And you've kind of bridged, in my opinion, you've bridged a couple, I think, a gap, and I don't know if you see that, but I tend to believe that you've bridged a gap of rapport with probably young hunters, young men, maybe particularly, I have to believe, that are kind of seeing what you've done from a standpoint of, hey, I'm just a guy that loves it, started out doing it just for the love of it, and was able to build something out of it. You know, when you were talking about guys that are like, hey, how do I get in the outdoor industry? Honestly, if I don't know, if I were to give any advice to that, because I think it's basically what you did, and we talked about that a little bit in the front, and is like, go out and hunt for, you know, do whatever it is that you love to do. Go out and hunt the way you love to hunt for, you know, about 10, 15, maybe 20 years, and then look at trying to make a living in the outdoor industry, because then you're going to have something unique to share. You're going to have a story to tell, or some wisdom that will offer value to people. You know, not that you can't do it other ways, but in my opinion, that's precisely what you've done. And I kind of feel like I lucked into that as well.
Appreciate that, Billy.
All right. Well, thanks again, everyone that tuned in. Thanks, Billy, for your time. We will be back Tuesday. Should be back on a regular schedule. My work's been sending me out of town a little more regular, so we've missed a week or two here and there. But we'll be back Tuesday with more content. And thanks, everyone, for tuning in. Catch you later.